on. We have 3 new assignments this week. So tomorrow I am going to start part 2 of our Elements of Art unit. And there's going to be an art criticism worksheet that you're going to fill out on one particular artist. We're going to be doing a mini art crit to get you warmed up for that. And I want you to pick an artwork that you're gravitated towards, not just something to check the box. You're also going to be uploading your Glaze lecture notes for 12 points. That was just one sheet of notes with the step-by-step glazing instructions. And then lastly, at the end of the week, to sum up everything that we've covered for glazing and the Elements of Art unit, you're going to be taking quiz 3 for 25 points. Any questions about the 3 assignments for this week? All right, so the Elements of Art student portfolio. I see some questions in the chat. Let's look at those. So Alexia said, is the whole thing due now or only up to slide 21? I want you guys to have all the slides done by today. And as of yesterday, I asked you to complete up to slide 23. Just checking to see if there are any other questions. So that is due tonight by midnight. Let me see where you're at with that. I'm going to ask you a poll on where you're at with the slideshow. Have you completed it? Are you still working on it and just need a few more slides? Or you're going to work hard tonight to try to meet the deadline. Each day that the slideshow is late, it's 2 points off, assuming that you meet all the criteria. So look at those responses and answer accordingly. Okay, waiting for 6 more people to respond to that poll. Where are you at with the slideshow? Waiting for 3 more people. Stay focused. Stay focused in the moment. Trying to help you guys get organized. All right, let's take 10 more seconds to respond to that poll. All right, so 3 of you said that you turned in the slideshow with images, not links. Half of you said you just have a few more slides to go. And 5 of you said that you need to meet that deadline and you have quite a bit to do. Thank you, Richard, for letting me know. All right, extra credit. So if you do want to get the 10 points extra credit, first you have to complete the slideshow. And then you can create an artwork highlighting 1 to 2 elements of art using the medium of your choice. And a medium is referred to as the materials that we use to create a work of art. So if we go here and we go to the extra credit, click on that. Nobody's turned it in, but you guys have until Friday to do it. I've gotten a few submissions from A and B, but if you want to get the points, I'll tell you the criteria. Let's make this a little bigger. So as these images are loading from last semester, the students who did this either picked 1 or 2 elements of art to showcase, and they used whatever materials they have at home. So one of my students who turned one in from Block A, he's like, Miss I, all I have is lined paper and a pencil. Okay, great. Do what you can with that. If you have a bunch of materials, make it that much more diverse in media. Number 2, you need to create a title for the element or elements of art you're trying to portray. You can pick up to 2 to combine. And then make sure that you're paying attention to detail. Your paper that you're using doesn't have any tears or rips, and you demonstrate a strong understanding of the elements of art. Okay, so here are the images from last semester. This artist did form and texture, this artist did line, and this artist did color and value. Notice the title, so be sure that you're putting a title. Once you finish this before Friday, you can attach the image to this document and submit it for credit. Any questions on the extra credit? All right, let me launch this poll. Are you interested in doing the extra credit, or would you like to just get the slideshow done and work on work from other classes? Go ahead and answer that poll. Okay, waiting for 7 more of you to respond to that poll. Yay or nay on the extra credit? Okay, waiting for 2 more people. And 1 more person. Okay, so it looks like 8 of you want to do the extra credit. Take advantage of that. I'll remind you of when it's due. And then next week, we are starting our next clay project. We're going to utilize our pins from our Pinterest account to build a ceramic mug by hand. We're going to use the pinch technique to create the form. We're going to use the coil method to create a handle. And then the other part of the criteria is you need to create a sculptural element. You can do more than one, but one is required at the bare minimum. And in this artwork created by a student last semester, they used the rose. So here's the project from start to finish. They've got the mug. They've also considered that it's going to shrink. Will your fingers fit in there if you're accounting for shrinkage? Is it functional? Also, what type of sculptural element do you want to put on there? And lastly, it's going to be used for something you can drink out of. So you can make it decorative and functional. Any questions about the next project? All right, so that will start next week, and we're going to do a planning sketch around it. Open your notebook up to the last page where you left off on notes. And I am going to reload one more time and use a different technique to present the information today. We're first going to be talking about the 2 types of texture. So starting with actual texture. If you haven't noticed, I've been living in this sweatshirt. I definitely wear it once a week. And the reason why I love it so much is because the texture inside is so soft and cozy, especially when I take it fresh out of the dryer. And texture is everything, especially when it comes to clothing. But with art, we use texture in 2 different ways. And in ceramics, we create actual textures. But if this was a drawing and painting course, we would create implied textures. And those are textures that aren't actually tactile. They're made to look like something that they are not. So I want you to know the difference between the 2 types of texture. And today at the end of our session, I'm going to be giving you some pop quiz questions to check your understanding on certain elements of art that we covered today and also last week. So once I get down to my lengthy slideshow and we're on texture, I'm going to make the screen just a smidge bigger. All right, so texture. In ceramics, I had a student, actually Kylie in this class, who used leaves to create texture on her pinch pot form. Now, kale is one of the most leafy greens, and it has bumps and ridges of texture. You can also take leaves that are more or less flat and indent the veins of those leaves onto a ceramic form. So that is considered actual texture. Now, we know that texture is the surface quality or feel of an object. So if I touch the inside of my sweatshirt, it's nice and soft. If I touch somebody who's a fashion designer's drawing of a garment they want to create, I'm not going to feel the metallic fabric. I'm going to feel the smoothness of the paper, which is different than actual texture. So I want you to write down texture one more time as part of this unit so you have all your elements together. So go ahead and write down actual texture, and this is the definition I want on the slide for texture. The surface quality or feel of an object. Once you have that, go ahead and type texture into the chat. Once you have the definition for actual texture, go ahead and type texture into the chat. So we wrote down the definition for texture along with our pinch pot lecture notes, but I want you to have it in this page of notes as well. All right, let's take another 45 seconds to get that note into the chat, typing texture in the chat when you have the definition for actual texture. Be in the present moment, folks. You don't want to have to go back and redo notes when I ask for the submission. Get them done now. Okay. In ceramics, we have the ability to create all kinds of actual textures. I got most of the late pinch pots. I got all but 7 pinch pots, and you all had the same project. And there were some similar textures, but not one person used the same approach to create texture on their pinch pot. You guys carved, you indented, you did a combination of both. Some of you added material to create a tactile quality. Now, some ceramic artists really focus on just texture on their forms. And this isn't really my style or approach, but imagine rolling a bunch of tiny little coils that are pointy on one side and a little thicker on the other, and creating these texture squares using pieces that you slip and score one at a time onto a form. The bottom middle one looks like barnacles. The one on the far right is another coil approach. Same thing on the upper right, but a little bit thicker. This is really difficult to do, but we can create all kinds of textures out of clay. Same thing here. I had a student in first period, and Carly took the end of a pen and she just started going nuts. She started taking little tiny dots and collectively putting them all over her form to create texture. And then on the inside, she did a whole face design using coils. It almost looked like a realistic face. So there's so many different things that we can do in the ceramic world to create a variety of textures. Now, what about something like this? This is a photograph from this mud bath that's full of sulfur in Arizona. And these kids that I saw were going in there and they were just sitting in the hot sun and in the hot mud bath and feeling the texture all over their skin. It was lubricious, it was warm, slimy, and the photograph really depicts the tactile quality. What about those little puppies? Why do we love puppies so much? Well, first of all, petting a new fresh coat on a puppy is so soft, and putting our faces up against their faces, feeling the wet nose and also the bumpiness of the nose, the pat of the paw, all actual textures. All right, next type of texture is implied texture. This is texture that's created to look like something that it's not. It's actually flat. So this technique is used by artists when they're working in 2 dimensions on a flat piece of paper or on a flat canvas, or maybe they're using a wood burning pen and trying to create the look of 3 dimensions. So we can see these squares that were drawn down on the bottom here. The third one on the right is made to look like wood. But when I run my hand across the paper, I just feel the smoothness of the paper. I don't feel the grains of the wood because it's implied. I want you to write down the definition for implied texture and type the word implied in the chat. Only 15 of you wrote down the last definition. I want to see all 21 of you on the meeting typing implied into the chat once you've got that definition. Implied textures are visual. We can only see them, but we can't feel them. They're made to look like something they're not. And once you have the definition for implied texture, type the word implied in the chat. Okay, waiting for 6 more people. Now, I want you to think about this. Jim Phillips is an artist born and raised in Santa Cruz County. He is the legendary artist for Santa Cruz Apparel. I guarantee most of you know that brand. And that Santa Cruz logo is iconic. It's known not only in this county and our state, but all over the United States and all over the world. And Jimbo Phillips didn't get famous from that logo. He got famous for the implied textures that he created on the Santa Cruz Screaming Hand. And if you've taken my class before, that actually came from a real experience. Jimbo was at the beach in Davenport when he was 14 years old, and there was a surfer who hit his head on a rock, and he was sitting there with his parents and observed the whole thing. And what he saw was this man who was dead upon impact from hitting his head. He noticed that the guy's eyes were popping out of his head. Also, the guy's tongue was sticking straight out of his mouth, and his hand was kind of crunched, all gnarly like this. And Jimbo thought, I'm going to go home and I'm going to draw that. I'm going to sketch out all those ideas and I'm going to come up with the Santa Cruz Screaming Hand. And when he was 19 and he got a contract with Santa Cruz Skateboards, he thought, that's it. This is what's going to make me famous. And this logo went everywhere. Jimbo is now 75 years old. He's been drawing the Santa Cruz Screaming Hand and creating these implied textures for over 50 years. But when I run my hand across these images, they're flat. He does an amazing job making these textures look actually real. So from all the little prickles and stubbles of the hair to the stippling dots on the eye to create that illusion of depth, to the curved lines of the fingers being bent, to the way he's drawn some of the nails with ridges, the bumps on the tongue, the dripping blood, all implied, all implied. And then he's done different variations over the years where he's taken that idea and modified it to create different types of implied textures. Like this one we see on the left with even more hair in the direction of the line changing, a couple of them spiked to show rigid areas of the fur. We also see the one on the right that's a little bit more gory, using shapes to show these different divots in the skin, the pointiness of the nails coming out of the fingers, the drippage of the fur, the color that he uses to portray the teeth, yellow and orange. Okay, so implied texture. Now, a different approach, just pencil and paper, a peanut, drawing a peanut. Trying to really create the illusion of depth using a range of values from light to dark on the value scale, creating light and shadow effects to show the bumpiness of the peanut shell and the different indentations. We've seen this image multiple times of oil painter Chuck Close, who was a photorealistic painter, and he could really allow you to kind of get that illusion of texture from the 5 o'clock shadow on his face, and also his hair varied in direction, looking messy, and his hair also on his chest that looks a little bit kind of puffy and sticking out. we can see the light and shadow being used here again to create that look of implied texture. A different approach, using softer values, more so middle grays, to create the fur of the cat or the fur of the dog on the right. I had my students in drawing and painting take this approach, and I said, let's trace our hand. And on each finger, I want you to create a different texture. Some textures were more successful than others, usually the ones that involve shading, creating that light and shadow effect, like we see here on the ring finger. Here's another artist approach, trying that same technique with the middle finger, but making it look a little more bony based on the curving of the lines. We also see the bumpiness of the index finger with light shading on each bump to show the protrusions of the implied texture. So texture, there's implied and there's actual. Let's take a look at the video. Try that one more time.
We tend to think of art as something just to look at, but a lot of artists make their work to stimulate our other senses. Sculptors, textile and fabric artists, bookmakers, ceramicists, and artists working in many other forms think a lot about how to engage viewers' sense of touch. Even when their art is not meant to be touched, artists put a lot of thought and work into creating many different textures. Texture is one of the 7 elements of art, along with line, shape, color, form, value, and space. Texture is the look or feel of a surface. Just like form, texture can be real or implied. If you were to run your hand across this sculpture by Alberto Giacometti, you would feel the hardness of the bronze metal and the roughness of the form that Giacometti created. This is called actual texture. Implied textures are only visual, they can't be felt. For instance, if you could touch the canvas of this self-portrait by Chuck Close, you wouldn't feel the varied textures of skin and hair. You would feel the smoothness of the oil paint. So these textures are implied because we can only see them. There are countless ways that artists create implied textures. How many different kinds of lines do you notice in this painting by Roy DeForest? You have the zigzag lines creating a woman's hair on the left, cross-hatching creating her skin, the blurred, smudged colors coming out of the dog's mouth and the man's mouth in the center. Those are just to name a few kinds of implied textures here. Textures can also be created through use of shapes. In this painting by Gustav Klimt, notice how he repeats shapes to create textures. You have the triangles and lines on the woman's dress on the left, the many spirals creating the tree in the center, and in the woman's dress on the right you have circles within circles, rectangles within squares, and all the scattered shapes throughout the piece create many different textures. Paintings and other typically two-dimensional art can have actual texture. Sometimes artists layer paint on the canvas so thick that it becomes three-dimensional. At that point, the paint is a sculptural element that can be manipulated and shaped. Some artists build up fabrics, textiles, jewelry, and many other objects on the canvas to create additional textures. Artists often feature the natural textures of the materials they use, or textures uniquely created and formed by hand. Whatever the approach, textures are an expressive tool artists use to reinforce their overall messages. The next time you're making a painting, drawing, collage, or sculpture, Find a way to incorporate textures that say something relevant and important to you.
That song gets stuck in my head every time. All right, so we have one last and final element of art, but before we go on to it, I want to test your knowledge on previous elements of art and have you name the element or tell me if the statement is true or false. All right, poll number 1, name the element. Blank is the lightness or darkness of tones or colors and deals directly with light. Which element of art is this? Is it form, value, color, or gradient? Blank is the lightness or darkness of tones or colors and deals directly with light. Go ahead and answer this poll. Name the element. I'm going to give you guys exactly a minute to get your responses in. Okay, waiting for 6 more people to respond to that poll. If you're not sure, take a guess. Take a guess before you take the actual quiz, and you only get 1 shot. Blank is the lightness or darkness of tones or colors and deals directly with light. Okay, 10 more seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right. 70% of you said that that element of art is value. You are correct. Value is the lightness or darkness of tones or colors, and it deals directly with light. I could take red and I could mix it with a little bit of white and get a light pink. I could mix it with a little bit of gray and get a tonal shade of red. I could mix it with black and get a darker shade of red, like maroon. I could do that with black and white and have a grayscale in between. So it really depends on the gradient. Some of you said color for that one. Color is in the definition, so that's not going to be the answer for that. All right, next one. There are 2 types of shapes. What type of shape is defined by points, angles, edges, and lines? We got this one last week, and a few of us got that wrong. Is it organic shapes or geometric shapes? What types of shapes are defined by refined points, angles, edges, and lines? Organic shapes or geometric shapes? Okay, 12 more seconds. Get your responses in. Test your knowledge on the subject. All right. So 73% of you said geometric shapes are defined by refined points, angles, edges, and lines. You're correct. Organic shapes are free form. They use more curvilinear lines. You don't see a lot of refined points, angles, and edges. So the correct answer for that is geometric shapes. All right, true or false? Shapes are 2-dimensional. They have length and width, and they are considered flat. True or false for that one? Shapes are 2-dimensional. They have length and width, and they are considered flat. Okay, waiting for 4 more people to respond to that poll. Stay focused, people. Stay focused. Waiting for 3 more people. All right, so 11 people said that that was true. 70% of you think that that's a true statement. You are correct. Shapes are two-dimensional. They only have length and width, and they are considered flat. If I take a square and I trace it on a piece of clay and I make 6 clay squares, each one of them is flat. It only has length and width. But when I start to take those squares and assemble them together by slipping and scoring, I'm starting to make a form because now I've added height and I have a three-dimensional form when I take 6 square shapes and I slip and score them together into a cube. All right. Let's keep going. Space. This is the trickiest one out of all of them. There are 2 different types of space, and I'm also going to be checking your knowledge there. So space is something that we need to consider in making art. There are site-specific artwork. So if I'm working at Coachella and I'm thinking about where I'm going to put the Ferris wheel and where I'm going to put the tents, I have a site-specific location and I only have so much space to create the different pieces of art that I'm going to incorporate, all of the different designs that go into making a music festival. Same thing with Burning Man. Or if I am doing an outdoor event and I want to have live murals or live mural painter, I need to think about how much room he has to be painting that mural while the music's going on. Okay, so we can think about space in that way. But space is defined as the distances around, between, and within things. I want you to write down the definition for space. So in this vessel on the screen here, we see that the artist has removed material, creating empty space in between the 2 figures that are gazing towards one another. The form itself is occupying space. Go ahead and write down the definition for space, and once you have it, type space into the chat. Space refers to the distances around, between, and within things. All right, let's take another minute to get this done. We want to finish this up and have a little time at the end for Q&A and also to check in on what we need to finish on the slideshow. Once you have the definition for space, go ahead and type space into the chat. Okay, waiting for 4 more people. Okay, waiting for 2 more people. All right, there's two kinds of space that we're going to look at today. The first one being positive space, and the second one being negative space. So maybe you've heard of the difference, but I want to make sure that you're clear on that. And this is why space can be tricky. There's other things that we need to think about when it comes to a composition. When we think about space, we can think about how people arrange a painting to show how things are closer to their eye if they're in the front, or how they recede in space as they near the background. But we're going to really focus on space in the terms of positive and negative space, and also how that communicates in sculpture. So for your next project, you're going to have to think about the space in between the handle and the form of your mug, how your fingers are going to fit in there. Also, you're going to think about the space of where you slip and score that sculptural element. So first, we're going to focus on positive space. And when we're talking about clay, that's anywhere clay exists. Or if we're talking about a drawing or a painting, we're going to think about positive space in terms of anywhere the artist applies material to a canvas or a sketchbook. So go ahead and write down the definition for positive space. Anywhere clay exists, the objects themselves. Once you have the definition for positive, go ahead and type positive into the chat. So when I think of positive space, I think of a plus sign. Anything that is occupying space, or if I take my paintbrush and I apply a black stroke of paint to the canvas, I am taking up space on that canvas using the black paint. So positive, any areas that are filled in, the objects themselves, positive space, it's occupying space, whether it be a mark on a canvas or a sculpture sitting on a tabletop. Once you have the definition for positive space, go ahead and type positive into the chat. You guys are hanging in there. You're doing fantastic. We're almost done. Okay, waiting for 9 more people on that one. Let's take another 40 seconds to knock that out. Type positive into the chat once you have it. Waiting for 6 more people. So looking at this image, our last project is to create an animal. And I'm sure that when you were thinking about creating a sculpture of an animal out of clay, you didn't think to portray it like the image you see here on the left. This person did the body of a figure out of solid clay. And then for the other half, the back end of that figure, they took a piece of clay, they rolled it flat, and then they took an X-Acto knife and they cut out the second half of the body, removing clay from that flat part. And now there's a hole in between that's communicating the rest of the body. That space is empty. It's negative space. And anywhere the clay exists is considered positive space. Same thing with the man here. You see that they've cut out a chunk of clay from the form, and the clay doesn't exist there. So it's considered negative. Anywhere the clay exists is going to be positive. It's occupying space. All right, let's take a look at a couple others. This isn't something that I would practice. It's incredibly hard to do. But if you take small, tiny pieces of clay and you stack them one on top of each other, not sure why my computer is being so slow today. You're going to get something that, I can go back here, I apologize. you're going to get something that looks like this. This is super hard to do. Really super tricky to create areas of positive and negative space. Now, let's look at this image. What areas of this image are considered positive? I want you to stare at this image, and I want to see everyone responding in the chat because I'm not getting everybody's participation today. Be mindful that I'm accounting for your participation and for the minutes that you're participating in. All right, so when we're looking at this particular composition that was done using black paint, a paintbrush, a sponge, and a white canvas, what areas are filled in? What areas of this composition are considered positive? I want you to pick one aspect of the composition that you see and tell me what areas you think are being communicated as positive space. Go ahead and type your response into the chat. Opposite, Moses. Opposite. Good, Marisol. Try again, Moses. Pick one area. Pick one area. So any area that's filled in with pigment, any area that occupies space, like clay. Good. Yeah. Okay, another 30 seconds to get your response in the chat. What areas of this image are considered positive? Good. Yes. All right. So some of you said the mustaches that are portrayed like birds. Some of you said the mustache trees. Some of you said the ground. Some of you said the man. If you said the white space, I didn't create that white space using white paint. The canvas was already white. So any areas that the artist filled in with pigment, in this case, black paint, are considered positive because they actually had to fill them in using a paintbrush. All right, good. Let's look at another one. What about, gee willikers, I apologize, you guys. My computer, when I record, has been so slow. All right, what about this one? What areas are considered positive? Go ahead and type your response in the chat. What areas are considered positive? Yeah. Yes. Good. For sure. Okay, Moses, you're getting it. You're getting it. Yeah, the little people, they're taking up space. The spill of the wine bottle. Any area around that's not filled in is considered negative space. Okay, good. All right, so let's look at negative space a little bit more in detail. First, writing down the definition. Negative space is the open area that surrounds an object. So it's often the white space in a drawing or painting, but not always. And when it comes to sculpture, it's the areas where material has been removed, carved out. So go ahead and write down just the first bullet point. Negative space is the area that surrounds an object. Once you've got just the first bullet point for the definition of negative space, go ahead and type negative into the chat. Just the first bullet point. Negative space, the open area that surrounds an object. And in a drawing or painting, oftentimes that space is white, but not always, not always. And when it comes to sculpture, anywhere you can stick your hand in between. Once you got the definition for negative, go ahead and type the word negative into the chat. All right, waiting for 8 more people. Almost done. Almost done. We're going to finish strong with this one. I know you guys are been super patient and great listeners. Thank you so much.